Welcome to the Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. Today, we're curious about urgency. Derek, do you think there's a place of urgency in leadership?
I think urgency is definitely a tool, but like with any tool, I think leaders run the risk of overusing that one. I think like with anything, like if you just are monotonous in your leadership style and how you talk about things, you're going to create some unintended consequences. I think. What about for you?
It's hard for me to start with the pros. I know there has to be a reason of using urgency as a leadership skill. At the same time, I personally am just so burnt out from over utilizing urgency that all of my examples are negative right now. So I'm going to challenge myself to think about the positives and how it can actually work. So okay, so let's think of when to actually use urgency. When could it actually be helpful, if it even is? So I guess an example I can think of is if there's a situation that maybe you weren't able to predict, you weren't able to see that it was coming and forecast it, and it's something that happened right away. And it has to also be solved right away, and the team has to come together. I suppose, there are situations in business where, there's some urgent situations that we have to go and do. So there is urgency, but I think it's as a leader, the leadership skill is more of how do you use urgency to bring a team together to want to actually solve an issue or a problem versus see it as like a fire drill. What do you think?
No, I agree with that pro because there are some things that are urgent. It's going to happen. Right. I come from a background too of doing like crisis communications and things like that. And there are some things that really literally are urgent. So if you don't have high urgency, or even as a leadership skill, if you don't know how to be urgent and create, I'm catching myself there because now I just said create urgency versus something is actually urgent. So I caught myself in the language that I use because I think we can get into that of creating urgency a little bit. But if
Mhm.
there really is an urgent issue, like you better have urgency to deal with it. Like business is competitive and business is sometimes it's really the first to market or the first to do something is all the difference in the world. And so I think like in those scenarios, if you aren't operating with urgency, you could just completely miss your opportunity or miss your window.
Yeah. A scenario I can think of is, let's say you're a leader of an engineering group and the app is down, and it is our responsibility to get
Yeah.
the app up as soon as possible. The website is down, or we can't collect money, or there could be technical things that happen that you just didn't foresee happening. And you can't just say, okay, let's take our time to figure this out. That is the business, and you need to make that happen as soon as possible. So there is urgency. I'm curious because you first started your first answer by saying urgency is a leadership skill. So, is urgency an actual tool and a skill, or is urgency a situation and the skill is knowing how to not be chaotic, but bringing calm in an urgent situation?
I think the skill is knowing what is truly urgent, and knowing like what is truly like the priority. And I think like maybe that is the skill of to be able to look at here's all the things that we need to do, or here's a number of things that we need to do, and we need to do this first. So I think there might be an appropriate level of urgency of, hey, if we need to do this first in order to do this. And so I think like that skill is that like discernment and that strategy and the focus, I think, versus the opposite of that of like the lack of skill is everything is urgent. And then you start getting into like the almost like the boy who cried wolf thing, right? If and then like I've heard a saying too that if everything is urgent, then nothing is urgent. If everything is an emergency, then nothing is truly an emergency. And then employees maybe find out, you know what, I don't think it's as urgent maybe as it's coming across or as it's being sold to us. And now you're going to have a influence issue or a better way of saying it, you're going to have a credibility issue if you try to lean into this too much.
And a trust issue,
And a
credibility and
trust issue.
trust, and trusting that my leader knows what's important and what is urgent, and I need to jump on and give it my all for this short period of time versus, well, let me sit on it and see if Alex brings it back up in 2 days.
Yeah. There is, like this is such a fascinating topic to me. And this was like, hey, what are we going to talk about? And I just love this topic because something I don't appreciate or I don't like is kind of everyone can kind of pick up with a hint. If everything is urgent, like it's a monotonous leadership style, that's the only way that they know how to motivate is to kind of create like this fire drill or this urgency of let's get it done. But at the same time, I really appreciate people who have a sense of urgency. And so it's kind of a little bit of like a paradox in some ways that like a sense of urgency, like what does that even mean? Because I if you were to ask me like some of my core values or some of my core characteristics, of somebody, I would oftentimes say like I enjoy working with people who have a sense of urgency, or I enjoy leading people who have a sense of urgency. But I think that's different than what's the opposite of sense, like full blown urgency.
Blown panic urgency, like all in. So, what do you think is the difference?
I think a sense of urgency, like I've never really tried to like dissect this before, but I think it comes back to that idea of strategy and like clarity. Like I think that someone has a sense of urgency, kind of like has a plan and knows I need to do this, and then I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I don't need to like wait to do this piece of it. I'm gonna do the piece that I can. Versus I think someone who lacks a sense of urgency is just sort of the person that waits, right? So I think I do just value a lot proactiveness in a lot of things. But I also think that the antidote to urgency is being proactive too. So I realize like I'm all over the place on this.
No, no, it
Am
makes
I making
sense.
sense?
No, it makes complete sense because what I'm hearing you say when you say like sense of urgency, it's a little bit of a drive and taking initiative and being strategic with what you're prioritizing and what you're going to take action on. So it's not necessarily I'm going to be proactive of every single thing that's happening, but again, prioritizing and knowing what to be prepared for, what to take initiative on, and just having that drive and setting that pace a little bit of, okay, we're going to get stuff done and we're not just going to sit on a problem or sit on an issue and then eventually get to it as well. So there is a little bit of a difference when you say like sense of urgency. When you say that's part of your core values, that just like makes me shiver because I just don't even like the word urgency anymore. That's just like where I am in my personal journey in life. But I would call that someone that is driven, takes initiative, and is proactive. That is definitely some of my core values.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's like in a non-urgent panic way, you ask somebody like, "Hey, could you take care of this?" No, the roof's on fire, it's a type of scenario. And to me, a sense of urgency is as the person's like, yeah, and they work on it versus a few weeks later, hey, did you? No, I didn't get around. That's what I'm talking about of like a sense of urgency, but probably a bit to leave the urgency out of it, driven, right? Or just focused or able to prioritize. There's probably a lot of ways to describe it versus the sense of urgency.
Yeah. Well, I really like the sentence you just said, and I'm probably just going to butcher it right now anyway. But the anecdote of urgency is actually having a sense of urgency and being
Being
proactive.
proactive.
I completely agree with you because I think a sense of urgency and like getting stuff done right now is important and having that skill is important. But I think you can very easily make a situation that is urgent and is like just urgent into chaos instead of a controlled atmosphere of like being strategic of how we're going to go through this. And I think it is being proactive. So the scenario I gave was your group of engineers and the app went down. Well, hopefully, we already have a game plan of that might potentially happen in the future. And if this does happen, here's some things that we can do in order to get back on track and in order to fix the app and the bug as fast as possible. Like, have you thought of those things before? Have you vocalized and communicated those things with your team before? Have you mentioned expectations? Because it might be like, hey guys, I know you work 9 to 5, but if our app does break down, you might have to work at night. like creating those expectations beforehand, creating like all of that game plan before the situation actually happens. So then you can actually work as a team and solve that problem. And it doesn't feel like a fire drill or no one knows what's happening. And I think that is the leadership skill is, are you able to get a group of people together in a situation that is chaotic and make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to do in order to get out of that chaos as fast as possible too.
I think then, kind of what we're delineating a little bit here is like true urgency versus false urgency. Or earlier, I caught myself when I said create
Create.
urgency, because that sort of implies that it doesn't actually exist if I need to create the urgency, right? Versus,
Mhm.
hey, this is just urgent. It just is. It just is urgent. We got to drop what we're doing. We got to focus on this because it just is urgent. Versus, I feel like I lack the ability to motivate, or I don't necessarily have like the tools to motivate. So then what do I need to do if something needs to get done? I need to like create urgency around it. But I think the danger there is now you're creating false urgency. And I think there's a real risk of getting exposed because you talked about like the credibility and the trust, because it's only going to work so much or so long or so often. I think that you can kind of create like this false urgency around something before people start to just tune you out, or you just burn everybody out.
Derek, tell me, what do you like? Give us an example of what you mean by creating urgency.
Let's just say there's like a new way we want to do things, a new step we want to roll out, into like a process that we have. Creating that urgency is, like just an artificial, hey, 3 weeks from now, we need to roll this out. Where there's really like nothing attached to the calendar, specifically. It's not, like a new,
An arbitrary date.
yeah, a new year, or, something is like where it actually, like if it were instead of like 3 weeks on the first of the month, does anything change if it were the second of the month or the third of the month? Like in the reality, if it's not, you're sort of, yeah, creating an arbitrary date, arbitrary timeline. And it's just like, go, go, go. We gotta get this done. There's nothing more important, et cetera, et cetera. Like to me, that is creating false urgency, but I completely understand why leaders do that. Because again, it's because they don't understand or they just lack the ability to motivate, to where everybody's like, yeah, let's get this done. Let's go through. And they either from a communication ability or from a incentives ability, just whatever it is, I feel like that's where that comes out of I don't want to say it's like lazy leadership, but I think it's like a better way of saying it is, to me, it's like the lowest level of leadership.
Yeah. Because it kind of goes back to the easiest form of motivation. Like back in our episode where we talked about what leadership used to be was do as I say because I'm the boss. So almost creating a sense of urgency just for the sake of it without actually the why, the context, the importance of it kind of reminds me back to I'm the boss. I said this is the date. This is what we're going to do. And it's not your responsibility as a team to understand why we picked that date, why it's this important. It's your job to get it done. And
Uh-huh.
so that to me is very old school leadership that doesn't, I mean, studies show it doesn't actually motivate people and engage people into solving a problem.
Yeah, I think it works briefly, right? Or it works for a little bit, and then the more it gets used, the less and less effective it gets, right? Because again, if you're just in a culture that literally every day there's a new fire drill, what you said before, or a new crisis, it just at some point you're like, what is going on here? Like nothing is this urgent, nothing is that urgent. Like and then just what that does even to just performance, right? It's like the 5 Ps or whatever. Proper planning prevents poor performance. Because it takes a toll to always operate in urgent, because mistakes will get made. It's not going to be perfect. There, you're probably going to end up doing way more work than if you had just done it a little slower and a little correctly. along the way, you probably end up further ahead and it takes a toll. And I think this is where burnout now starts to enter the equation because you can't just push to the limits all the time.
Yeah. You make a good point. People don't perform at their peak when it's fast paced all the time without a stop. Like a mentor of mine once said to me, slow is fast and fast is slow. Because I was at a place where I was just like going really fast and trying to get everything done and dialing in everything in, and everything's super important. And guess what? I made mistakes because if everything is going that fast, you're making mistakes, then you just have to go back to fix those mistakes. That might even take longer than if you actually slow down to do what's most important and put your efforts into that, and then be able to move on instead of keep coming back to it too. And so that's the same thing for your team. As a leader, if you are making everyone work in a very fast pace all the time, everything's urgent, yes, it's going to cause burnout and this and that, but also it doesn't help performance. Performance will go down eventually as well.
Yeah. When you referenced, back in some previous episodes, how we went through different leadership styles, and you were kind of referencing to, like that old school transactional, type of style, or the old school, like, authoritative of don't, I'm the boss, don't question, just do fast. And then, there's a modern leadership style that we also talked about a little bit called the pace setting style.
Mhm.
So that's like the nuance I'm trying to bring to this is it is a legitimate leadership style. But like with any of the styles, when you're less skilled as a leader, you only have like your natural style. And that's the only tool that you have. And so there are a lot of risks there when you're only good at one leadership style. And so some people are very naturally good at getting things to move and getting things done, right? And they have that pace setting, that natural pace setting style. And there are some careers that they're really well suited for, right? Again, they're going to lose effectiveness if they don't have the ability to move into like situational leadership where they need to adapt the appropriate style for the appropriate time and only lean into the pace setting when it's truly what the team needs and what the people need. Because sometimes we do need a pace setter, like we all do. At sometimes we need someone. So on the flip side, if you're not naturally good at it, that is also going to be a weakness for you as a leader. If you're not able to create urgency, that I said create again, right? But to set a pace, to be the pace setter, there will be some times that you need that skill too. So I want to be like balanced on this. It's probably a very small percent of the time.
Yeah. I keep going back to when you keep saying create urgency. I just don't know how I feel about it quite yet. I do think it is important to set the pace and stuff, but I'm thinking of an example of like, let's say revenue and profit is down and you need to bring revenue up as fast as possible. That is as high as it gets when it comes to urgency and solving a problem as soon as possible. Like that is as high as it gets. So I would argue that it's not necessarily the leader creating urgency, but the situation is already there. It's a urgent situation, and it's the leader that is helping manage a team through an urgent situation. I don't think you actually need to create urgency for it. The situation itself is like the urgent part of it. Am I making any sense?
I think that's why I keep catching myself too, is because I'm on the same page with you, right?
Yeah.
But I think as a leader, you do create something, right? So
Yeah, you bring that information to the team and say, "Team, our numbers are down. This is the situation. We have X amount of months that we need to get to this amount in order for X, Y, and Z to happen. So let's get together as a team and let's figure out how are we going to generate more revenue and more profit in the next 2, 3 months." And then like that is now you're not creating urgency, but you are setting the pace for the team that here's the situation, here's why it's important, here's the context that I think is super important to know for a team. You're getting them engaged in solving the problem and then helping the team prioritize the next step of creating a strategy of now how are we going to get to the solution that we're looking for.
yeah, because I think what you just kind of outlined there in that example, you're creating transparency, you're creating clarity, you're creating innovation, you're creating a plan, you're creating focus, you're creating priorities, which there's nothing bad with any of that, right? Versus just creating a crisis to kind of take advantage of, or to almost manipulate again a little bit of go 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 go, right? A little bit when maybe the situation didn't actually call for that approach, and we would have solved it better without that.
You know the sentence to light a fire on someone?
Yeah, yeah,
That's what it kinda reminded me of when you say create an urgency and all that stuff. It's like light a fire. We even say that as a positive sometimes of like, we're thinking when you light a fire, like on someone, they're gonna like go fast and be motivated and solve problems. So there is this like social thought that we have in general of in order to motivate people, you need to light them on fire. You need to create a sense of urgency. Like that is like as a society what we kind of talk about a lot of the
yeah.
times too.
And this episode is a direct sequel to what we talked about in the last episode, because we talked about momentum and motivation, right? And so motivating people is hard. It takes a lot of skill to motivate somebody. And even last time we talked a little bit about extrinsic versus intrinsic, creating the basically creating the right conditions with your leadership skill that someone motivates themselves. Right. And so with this idea of, yeah, lighting a fire under someone or whatever, we do glorify that type of language, but that is extrinsic motivation. And the problem with extrinsic or outward motivation again is it has a short shelf life. It's not sustainable. And so that's why, like, I think leaders who lead this way, it's one crisis to the next, right? Because it's short bursts of energy and focus, and it's not like a sustainable internal motivation. That's a whole different leadership style.
Yeah. So for everyone that's listening to this episode, what is a question we want them to be curious about themselves? Maybe of when is the last time you there was a sense of urgency on your team, and then maybe thinking back of the root cause of that urgency of was it me as a leader that created a sense of urgency somehow? Is it an urgent situation? Was it actually urgent or was it not that urgent? So I think that in itself could be helpful, as well as when was the time before then that we had another urgent. So how often is it happening? Could be a really good reflection for leaders, just to see, am I part of the problem? Am I doing this right now or not?
Yeah, well, even to take that even like more granular, like if you're the leader, how often, like daily, do you kind of derail somebody's plan that they had for the day? Right. So like if we've talked about before, like empowering your team, giving them autonomy, right? And autonomy is very connected to intrinsic motivation. Typically, we talked about that last time too. There's the more autonomy we feel we have, typically the higher levels of intrinsic motivation. So autonomy is that ability to wake up, look at my, to-do list, create my to-do list for the day, create my focus for the day, create my priorities for the day. And then I think that's a self-reflection as the leader. How often do I derail that? Be like, hey, Alex, drop what you're doing. I need you to do this.
That's a
That
fire.
I think for a lot of people, if they're being honest, they do that every day, if not multiple times every day, and they don't think about the consequences of that. That is how you demotivate people. That is how you lose momentum. That is how you burn people out. But I know that's not the intention. No one sets the goal of, hey, I'm going to burn my people out today. Like no one wakes up with that intention. But it's all these little actions, all these little leadership actions that end up creating that result. And then, like we've talked about, everybody is burnt out. The leaders and the team, everybody's burnt out these days.
I love it. I love the reflection piece of it. And so let's say You reflected on it and you realized you're a yes in some of these categories. I think the next thing is now creating a game plan of, okay, now how do I transition away from everything's urgent and I'm derailing the team and I'm realizing that the team is being burnt out, or even with yourself. It doesn't even have to be something you're doing to other people. It's definitely something that you could be doing to yourself too. And so that's one part of it. And so the next part is now prioritizing. I think is a big one that we said, right? So a situation comes up, having the skill to prioritize, is this truly urgent? Is it not urgent? Is it truly important? And do I need to have the rest of the team a part of this to solve a problem? I think that's step one. And then we said communication, that communication skill of being able to communicate the situation to your team without freaking everyone out. That's a huge next one, which we do have another episode earlier on that's about communication and using whole messaging to deliver information. What else do we say, Derek? So, like context, a game plan, being proactive. So, being able to think about what might happen in the future and having a game plan for it before it even happens. Anything
There's
else?
there is a piece of it, and I only want to just reference this because at some point I want to do a whole episode just on this, and I don't think I've referenced it yet. But there's this idea of resonant leadership versus dissonant leadership. And it's sort of like a add-on to any of the other styles. You can take any of the other leadership styles and do it in a resonant way or doing it in a dissonant way. And essentially the idea behind a resonant leader is you shield your team as the leader, you shield them from unnecessary urgency, unnecessary stress by being very like self-aware and emotionally aware of, hey, do I really need to share this with them today? Or maybe like this is a good topic in a one on one. Hey, do I really need to derail everybody today? Or is that something that I could actually do kind of in the background as the leader and take care of? And then just update everyone on what I did and what I took care of them. Or I'm feeling stressed by it as the leader. Do I really need to distribute that stress to other people? And the resident leader views themselves as their burden or responsibility as the leader is to kind of shield people appropriately, not without lacking transparency. That's not what that goes into. But basically, like the dissonant leader dumps all of their emotion and thinking constantly onto their team. And I think in relation to today's topic, does it through urgency.
That's good. We should definitely do a full
It'll be a good
episode
topic.
on that.
I know we got to wrap this up. The one other thing, Alex, I just want your reaction to before we wrap this up is our one of our goals with this podcast is to rethink things. And I sort of feel like we're on the tail end of a leadership era that's like hustle, grind, one emergent, like that was glorified, I think, by a lot of influencers like Gary Vee and, some other people kind of pop to mind where they've sort of like glorified, like burn yourself out type of approach and burn through employees. Like, uh, you know, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, like all of this era that we just went through, like they're notoriously horrible to work for, right? Because they will just squeeze every ounce out of you and then replace you with somebody else. And that's been glorified. So, but I think we're on the tail end of that, where we've now got like a new generation and even just a new thought that's rejecting that of like, that didn't work.
100% agree with the it didn't work and let's kill it as soon as possible. Let's kill the hustle culture and the burnout culture as soon as possible. I think there's the reason that we are on the tail end of it is because people are burnt out.
Everyone is
Either
burnt out.
everyone is burnt out. Everyone is stressed, burnt out. They hate their jobs. They hate looking for another job and job hopping and all this stuff. And either you've experienced that being in an office already, being in a business already, or you were a kid and you saw your parents stressed out going through that. And I think we're coming to the realization of why in the world are we letting businesses do this to us? Why in the world are we letting leaders affect my life this much? Not just like how you're affected when you're in the office, but we are spending most of our life working with the people that are in our office. And so that affects how I show up to home. how I show up with my kids, how I show up in my relationships, how I show up in the world. And I think that's why we're having like almost like a whiplash of, hey, that's not working. It's affecting us in such a negative way. And now we're seeing Gen Z saying, we need to rethink the entire way of how we are going to business. And they don't want the stress and they want a better work life balance. Millennials are definitely on there too, but millennials are a little bit more of like a still in the old school way, but wanting to see things change way as well. But there's a reason why the newer generations feel this way. And absolutely, it's changing and it's going to have to change in order to be successful with the new generations.
There's got to be a better way.
There's gotta be a better way. All right. This episode was about urgency. I hope you guys can all reflect on it and redefine your leadership skill when it comes to urgency. We will see you next time.